In 1991, the residents of Strathfield were left traumatised when a man opened fire in a local shopping plaza. In just 10 short minutes, the gunman unleashed a wave of terror that would become the most violent and shocking in Sydney's history.
I think people were horrified. Just couldn't believe that this would happen in Australia.
Armed with a machete, a rifle and 100 rounds of ammunition, the unidentified gunman burst into action, stabbing and shooting at those within close range.
The first shots rang through the plaza, packed with Saturday afternoon shoppers just after 3:30.
I did look out and I could see a person lying on the floor, obviously had been shot.
It was all done within such a short space of time.
Just a random attack of violence.
It was a semi-automatic weapon. That gave him the ability to kill a lot of people.
When people are killed under those sort of circumstances, that just becomes the news of the day, the news of the week.
That's what his whole ambition was, to kill as many people as possible.
The abhorrent actions of one man that day changed the lives of a tight-knit community forever and left physical and mental scars that are still felt today. The Strathfield Massacre was a crime that shook Australia. In August 1991, 15-year-old Roberta Armstrong met up with her friend at the Coffee Pot, a popular and central cafe inside Strathfield Plaza.
She was a shy, demure young lady, gorgeous young girl. She loved ballet. She was very involved in her academic studies, and she also played the flute. Everybody liked her. She was just one of those really sweet Year 10 girls.
Also inside the cafe that day, enjoying a weekend of shopping and sightseeing, was Joyce Nixon, daughter Patricia Rowe, and Rowe's sons, aged 9 and 14. Amidst the crowds of families and friends inside the cafe, sat a solitary figure, absorbed in thought. His next move would leave 7 people dead. Celebrated as one of the most culturally diverse areas of Sydney, Strathfield is an inner west suburb just 14 kilometres from Sydney City and its surrounding harbour.
Strathfield was a place that was a safe haven for everybody.
We had our friends in the area. We really didn't go outside Strathfield for friendships, and our whole life centred in Strathfield.
It's a real community. It's centred around families. We all go to the same sports on Saturday morning. We all pitch in and help at the sausage sizzle. It's a great place to live.
Strathfield Plaza opened in 1981 as a single-storey retail shopping centre and a 2-level car park. Helen and Jeff Boyce owned and operated the Strathfield Plaza news agency from 1989 to 1993.
We were very comfortable here. We'd been here for quite a number of years and we knew lots of people. People came into the shop, we were happy to talk to them. Kids came into the shop, younger kids that we were used to talking to, and we were just completely safe and happy. It was our whole life, actually, our whole life.
Saturday afternoon at Strathfield Plaza in Sydney's western suburbs on the 17th of August 1991. Inside, the usual hustle and bustle of late afternoon shoppers, families and shopkeepers going about their business.
Well, it was a busy day, always a busy day. People would be rushing in to get things at the last minute. There would be families, the kids would come and want to buy magazines. It was just a normal day. For some reason, Jeff said, "Oh, well, I'll come to the shop as well today." So he was there too, and then in the afternoon there was Jeff, myself, and one of the young girls, Rachel.
One local shopper visiting Strathfield Plaza that Saturday was 41-year-old Greg Reed, an ex-Navy officer who had also served in Vietnam.
There's a hardware store inside Strathfield Plaza, so I had to go and get a toilet seat. And while I was there, I went next door to the paper shop.
The day continued just like any other. But just before 3:30 p.m. that afternoon, the regularity of Strathfield life and the safe and vibrant community they enjoyed would be changed forever.
I think at that time Jeff was sitting out in the office doing something, and we were sort of getting ready to close up when this really strange noise appeared.
I just happened to be buying the newspaper, and that's where it all started.
It sounded like metal trays being dropped on the terrazzo floor. And before I had time to think much more, this young lass came running round from the bread kiosk and said, "There's a man round there with a gun and he's shooting."
In a sudden and frenzied attack, the man brutally stabbed 15-year-old Roberta Armstrong, who sat directly behind him. The young schoolgirl had no chance to defend herself. Before customers could react, he grabbed a semi-automatic rifle from his satchel and opened fire inside the busy cafe.
Since I heard the screams and the shooting, I became alert. I sort of heard the shots being fired. I looked straight out the shop and there was sheer panic. A lot of people ran into the shops.
Within minutes, the shopping centre became a scene of chaos. The gunman, having stunned shoppers in the cafe, was now shooting randomly at people in the plaza.
There were 10 people in our shop, plus the three of us, and we herded them all into our little back office, which probably measured about...
2 metres by 2 metres.
They didn't have time to close their shops. Most of the shopkeepers got all their customers to go to the back of the shop, and that was the only defence they had.
It was very tight. We were standing like shoulder to shoulder, and then I just happened to see another lady hiding behind the card racking, and I pulled her in too.
People were hiding behind anything they could find.
And there we were, standing there not knowing what was happening.
I saw people fleeing and I saw people laying down, and that's when I saw one person being shot in front of me.
On a busy Saturday afternoon, Strathfield Plaza would have hundreds of visitors, and that day in 1991 was no different. As the gunman moved away from the cafe, he opened fire on anybody in his sight.
I did look out and I could see a person lying on the floor, obviously had been shot, and one shot had been fired at the chemist, which was next door to us. By this time we did sense there was someone with a gun. We had no idea where that person was in the plaza.
Still unaware of the gunman's whereabouts, Jeff and Helen Boyce hid. Greg Reed began to track his movements in the hope the gunman could be stopped.
When I saw him downstairs, I could see that he was trying to imitate a commando person, but he wasn't a commando. He wasn't calm in anything he was doing. He wasn't panicking either.
I contacted the police and I wasn't able to give them any information, but they held me on the phone in case I could see something.
I went from the newspaper shop out into the shopping area, and there's a set of stairs that go upstairs to the car parks. I actually went up to the first level. That's when I discovered that he's not shooting anybody laying down. So that's what I had to do, get everybody to lay down. I thought, I've got to save people from this man. I sort of said, well, hit the deck. There's a gunman behind me and he's killing people. Very simple. He actually got wind of me doing this, and he saw that I was getting people to lay down, and he saw me in the on the ramp, trying to locate him. And he deliberately came to the next level above me, purposely come towards shooting myself. I then went up to the next level, and I wanted to find out where he was. So I looked over the parapet, and he looked up to see where I was and fired 2 shots at me.
In 1991, as people enjoyed an afternoon shopping inside Sydney's Strathfield Plaza, an unknown assailant launched into a sudden and violent rampage. Greg Reed, a local Strathfield resident, had been observing the gunman whilst trying to warn people of the danger. Inadvertently, he had caught his attention and was faced with the gun himself.
That was very close. The bullets came very close to my face.
Having narrowly missed being shot himself, Greg was determined to warn as many people as he could of the danger they found themselves in, and instructed them to lay down and hide.
Very hard to explain to people that when you're running on adrenaline, I was able to leap 3 stairs at a time, and I was a big man, and for me to leap 3 stairs at a time, it takes a lot of physical strength. You have just about superpowers when you're running on adrenaline.
In just 10 minutes, the lone gunman had killed 6 people inside the cafe, 1 person outside the news agency, and dozens more were left injured throughout the plaza. His rampage was still ongoing as he made his way along the ramp and outside into the car park.
We do believe that the person with the gun had moved up onto the car park, which was removed from our area. So we looked out and it was just vacant.
I said, oh, he's there. And so I went outside, and there was a young couple there. And I said, look, hit the deck. There's a gunman behind me and he's killing everybody.
Stay down! Stay down!
There was a lot of people still driving their cars around because they could hear the shots, but they didn't know what was going on. So I went around to each car and got everybody to stop what they're doing, just lay down flat in the car seat. When I was actually out in the first level car park, I was telling this lady to lay down on the seat flat, and she turned around and she said, too late, he's right behind you. He was about 20 yards away. In that sort of distance, you really couldn't miss. He didn't fire straight away, and I looked at him and he didn't fire, so I said, well, you've got to leap sideways, and that's what I did. And when I leapt, he fired.
Greg Reed's courageous efforts caught him in the gunman's path once again. Instinctively leaping to what he hoped was safety, the bullets tore through the air as he hit the ground.
And that's why I got shot in the feet, because he caught me going through the air.
I did go out after some time. I did go out in the back alleyway out to the dock and looked up, and I could see the gunman standing on the stairs which led from the car park of the plaza into the administration building. When I looked up, it was just, to me, it was a man with a gun, just looking out over the car park. I don't think he could see me or didn't recognise that I was there because I very tentatively looked outside the dock. And as soon as I sighted him, I then moved back inside. And if there was only one person with a gun, and at that stage we didn't know, I at least knew where that person was.
In just 10 minutes, the unidentified gunman had discharged over 50 rounds of ammunition and showed no signs of stopping.
I wasn't aware that I'd been shot, and there was no blood coming from anywhere out of my body or anything like that. So I was very focused, and the only thing I was focused on was to save people's lives. Being that focused, I thought the only thing that I can do is use my car to try and run the gunman down.
As the gunman lost focus, the frustration and defeat were evident to those who witnessed his actions. Firing aimlessly at stationary targets, the gunman then fired shots from the car park roof in an effort to inflict further impact.
I've no doubt that he wanted to kill a lot of people, but it's a lot harder to hit targets than you think, particularly with the emotion that went along with it.
There was a whole lot of more shots that were fired. He fired some in the direction of Strathfield Station, and then he went over to the employment service and he tried to shoot the lockout on a set of aluminium doors. And of course, you know, he obviously didn't understand that where the locking mechanism were. Really very amateurish. He displayed that, one by not being able to shoot me at a very short distance for a start. The other part was the way he was doing it. It wasn't the way people do it in real life.
I imagine he was just forming that idea as he went along. He was running out of steam. Let's say he was running down, that he'd done what he intended to do, and this was like an aftermath and a winding up.
The gunman's next move would horrify everybody nearby as he set his sights on an unsuspecting woman driving her car.
He'd actually kidnapped another person and got her to drive the car, and she was driving down the ramp.
Strathfield Plaza had become a scene of carnage and devastation. In just 10 minutes, a lone man with a knife and a semi-automatic gun had indiscriminately attacked shoppers, killing 7 and injuring dozens more. From the rooftop car park, he fired at people below before his actions took a dramatic twist when he took a woman hostage.
As I was coming down towards the car, I noticed another vehicle on its way down.
The man was in the car with me and with the gun 10 centimetres from my face. And then he said, "Stop." And I stopped and I thought, this is it. And then all of a sudden he made this very heartfelt apology and said, "I'm really sorry."
Yes, I don't understand the apology. I've seen many criminals apologise and say they were sorry. Mostly they were sorry they were caught. And I think what Wade was feeling was a bit of a rush of emotion at what he'd done. I don't think there was much guilt, because I don't think these people feel much guilt.
After a terrifying few minutes, the gunman unexpectedly changed his mind, apologised and got out of the woman's car.
He sort of kept walking over towards the other cars, and I heard a single shot.
Of course, he had to disappear off the stage in the right manner, rather than be caught and locked up and tried and so on.
As emergency services scrambled to help the injured, police steeled themselves to understand the enormity and scale of the gunman's actions. In just 15 minutes, 8 people were dead, 6 people lay wounded, and dozens more were traumatised and in shock. Survivors of the Strathfield Massacre came to realise how fortunate they had been.
He shot me through the heel, and going through the heel, I was just lucky that he hadn't picked another type of shell to use, and it could have been a lot worse.
It's possible to mobilise the ambulance chaplain and possibly also the police chaplain.
It was all done within such a short space of time. I think the first police were there just before he shot himself.
The ambulances were all at the entrance to the plaza in the boulevard, whereas we got out the corner door. So we didn't see any of that. We only saw one person. Our little Rachel said, "Oh, I have never seen a dead person before." And I thought, gee, I need to get her home and away. We had no idea how many people had been hurt or what had happened, except we saw this man. That's all we knew.
And we came up to here, our home, and we brought Rachel up here and rang her parents to tell them that she was safe, and they came over and picked it up.
We just wanted to get home. I said, now I feel safe. Then I think we just sat down and had a cup of tea, didn't we? I think we started to feel perhaps then how bad it had been and how lucky we were to still be here.
As police and media descended on the plaza, for those involved, the shock had started to set in.
It just shifts the whole of society, I feel, and it definitely shifted the Strathfield community to a point where the community bonded.
Everybody was still in shock.
When something like this happens in a community, nearly everyone is touched in some way, to one degree or another.
It wasn't just the children who had fears, it was the teachers, it was the whole Strathfield community and extended community that really did pull together.
We all had businesses there, it was our livelihood. We wanted everything to go back to what we were used to before the event happened.
There were a lot of people who would never come back there again, and I've heard people say even now they never went back there again.
That's the scary thing that I thought, that we all thought, you know, where are we safe? If we're not safe in Woolies doing our shopping on a Saturday morning, where can we be safe?
Within just 10 short minutes, 7 people's lives had been cut short before the killer turned the gun on himself. 15-year-old Roberta Armstrong, 61-year-old Joyce Nixon, 36-year-old Patricia Rowe, 51-year-old George Maveris, 47-year-old Carol Dickinson, 17-year-old Rachel Milburn, and 51-year-old Robertson Can Hock Voon. 2 of the Strathfield Massacre victims killed in the cafe came from Sussex Inlet, a small coastal town south of Sydney. The violent massacre at Strathfield was as devastating as it was difficult to understand. Never before had Sydney witnessed such a sadistic crime, and people justifiably wanted answers. Why would a man with no police record, no history of violence, no obvious motive, commit such a savage and ruthless attack?
I can't say why a man would do that, and we'll never know. We might try and guess and maybe probe the guy's history. This sort of stuff just takes us by surprise. And why did he do what he did? We didn't know, and yet it happened.
Sydney resident and eminent forensic psychiatrist Dr. Rod Milton was called to participate in the inquiry into the mass murder after the gunman took his own life. Dr. Milton built a profile of the deceased gunman and helped to identify any motivating factors to this senseless massacre.
There'd been a lot of shooting and quite a few deaths, and my job was to investigate the perpetrator and form an opinion as to what motivated him to do it and what influences were relevant. It was an awful tragedy with the bodies lying there. It was just an awful scene.
The gunman was identified as 33-year-old Wade Frankham, a part-time taxi driver who lived in North Strathfield, just 3 kilometres away. Previously unknown to the police, with no distinguishing qualities or personality traits, it seemed Wade had achieved very little in his life. With nothing outstanding in his background, the authorities struggled to determine a motive for his rampage.
The scene itself was not that important as it happened. What was really important was the people I interviewed about Wade Frankham. The officer that was assigned to me took me about, and I saw Wade Frankham's relatives. I even saw the prostitutes that he used to frequent because they were very kind. They volunteered to come and be interviewed. I saw lots of his friends, employers, doctors. It was possible to get a very wide spectrum of people that had had a lot to do with Wade and to form what seemed to me quite a comprehensive picture of what this chap was like.
Psychiatrists have revealed the 33-year-old part-time taxi driver was being treated for depression, but they have few other clues to his personality.
The main thing about Wade was, like many of these people, he was a failure. Wade thought he was a lot better than he was and thought he could do a lot better, and of course when he didn't, he got cranky. And I think it was that caused him to do the killings. His sister said that he never really showed much feeling to him. He'd get upset about something, but he'd hold it in.
Gaynor Frankham told the inquest she and her brother had a strict upbringing. During their school years, their parents would lock them in their rooms to study. Even when you did achieve, if you got 99%, they'd say, "What happened to the 1%?
He was a bit dyslexic and he didn't get on terribly well at the private school that he went to, and certainly the dyslexia was an important element. If that had been corrected, perhaps he wouldn't have been so bad.
As Dr. Milton built the profile, he sensed Wade's upbringing and parents' behaviour could have had a decisive impact in shaping him into the man he became.
Wade had a background of success, but the parents, I think, affected him in 2 ways. One was their distance from him and his mother's unpredictability in emotion and love and that kind of thing. There was this wretched business with his mother being unpredictable and given to rages and drinking more than she should have done and smoking a lot. And the father, I think, not being able to cope with this, being a bit distant from it. The other was that they regarded him too highly and that he then thought he was capable of much more than he was.
Wade Frankham's mother was an alcoholic who had suffered a severe chronic mood disorder. In April 1990, just 16 months before the massacre, she committed suicide, leaving Wade devastated. Wade inherited $30,000 after his mother's death, buying a stereo and a video, and spending the rest on the services of prostitutes.
I think Wade felt bad about himself generally, and I think he had some doubts about his sexuality, but he was capable of some normal sexual responses. How much, we're not quite sure, because he had the prostitutes do things to him that suggested homosexuality, but the fact that he had girls do it suggested that he needed to be associated with women rather than men.
Looking back over his behaviour, Wade Frankham took steps towards preparations for the ensuing carnage. Having purchased a semi-automatic rifle, he had his knife sharpened in July, while his hair was cut exceptionally short the day before the massacre in August 1991.
I suspect that buying the gun meant he had thoughts about using it, and then he bought 100 rounds of ammo and Certainly he'd formed his ideas clearly by the time he got the knife sharpened and wanted a better edge on it and that kind of thing. But then as he ran out of money and ran out of a supply of girls that he could pay, I think he felt desperate because sex was a good outlet for him and perhaps an only outlet. And I think it was sort of building up to a climax.
In 1991, 33-year-old Wade Frankham spent just 10 minutes murdering innocent people as they shopped at Strathfield Plaza. Armed with over 100 rounds of ammunition and a knife, he killed 7 people before turning the gun on himself. As the victims were mourned, experts delved into Frankham's past for any clues to his behaviour. After spending his inheritance on prostitutes, things had become desperate for Frankham.
As the money ran out, then that's when it would build up to a final, what he would regard as a success. Many of these people do regard the killing as success at the end of a life of failure. That was part of the one successful event in his life.
On the morning of the massacre, Wade Frankham caught a train from North Strathfield Station. Here, he chillingly warned the station guard he knew by name to go home. Arriving at Strathfield Plaza at 1 p.m, Wade sat for hours inside the cafe, contemplating his next move, and then, without warning, launched into a shocking attack. Wade Frankham stabbed 15-year-old Roberta Armstrong before reaching for the gun and shooting Joyce Nixon and daughter Patricia Rowe, cafe owner George Maveris and Carol Dickinson, and her 17-year-old niece, Rachel Milburn. Wade then headed out into the plaza, firing at those who fled. 51-year-old Robertson Can Hock Voon was killed outside the news agency, with dozens injured from bullet wounds. The entire massacre took less than 15 minutes. The Strathfield Massacre in 1991 claimed 8 lives and injured scores of innocent people. Amidst calls for urgent gun law reform, the heroic deeds of one man were recognised. Greg Reed's incredible bravery at the shopping plaza that day helped save over 10 lives. A year later, he was rewarded with the Star of Courage.
You feel very humble when you're amongst all the other recipients of Australian honours and award system. Yeah.
I think it's one of the virtues of humanity that people do these things unthinkingly of the consequences, but to help their fellow person.
It makes you proud. It makes you proud to be an Australian.
The Strathfield Massacre sparked debate about the sale and ownership of guns that would culminate in the banning of semi-automatic weapons just 5 years later, a legislation enforced by Prime Minister John Howard after the 1996 Port Arthur tragedy. Greg Reed's Star of Courage was well deserved and a proud and dignified moment of celebration in an otherwise horrific memory. As families prepared to bury and remember their loved ones, the small community of Sussex Inlet on the New South Wales coast gathered to say farewell to 2 of the victims in a public show of love and support.
In 1991, I was the Assistant Minister in the parish of Milton Ulladulla with Sussex Inlet. And I can say it was quite daunting to be responsible for the funeral service for Joyce and Patricia. I've not done anything in front of that many people before. There was roughly 1,000, they tell me. I think there were 600 inside the building, another, 400 outside that couldn't fit in. The community is a bit like a bit of an extended family. They're not related, but they're related by friendship.
Despite surviving the tragic events, Greg Reed suffered personally from what he had experienced.
And what I found is I suffered post-traumatic stress from it. and to get relief, it takes a long time, and it's not something you get over in 5 minutes.
Working and talking to these people and living with the people that survived, meeting people like Greg, you realise that this story is such a big part of their life.
The incident is still very live in your mind, and you still remember it frequently.
For anyone involved in a public tragedy, commemorating the memory highlights the significance of those who sadly lost their lives and the strength of those who survived. A public acknowledgement of the event and educational scholarships in memory of the victims helps to remember a tragic time with dignity and sensitivity.
We've consulted the community about, particularly the victims' families, etc., about how they want to commemorate, how they want to move forward, and that's how we came up with the annual ceremony.
Every year for the last 25 years I've been going there and having a memorial service at 11 o'clock. The problem is on August the 17th every year I feel really unusual feelings on that day. Something like this shouldn't be forgotten, and we shouldn't sweep things under the carpet and say they didn't happen.
During the ceremony I just cried.
Any loss of life is tragic, particularly one on the threshold of all it has to offer. Wade Frankham's first victim that fateful day was also the youngest. 15-year-old Roberta Armstrong, affectionately known as Bowie to her family and friends, was a talented and much-loved student at the MacDonald College in North Strathfield. The college decided to establish a scholarship in her loving memory.
The Roberta Armstrong Scholarship is probably valued at around about $25,000, so it's a very valuable scholarship and certainly supports a family and that student throughout the coming year. That to us is how the name lives on, and we award the scholarship at speech night at the end of every year, and up until quite recently Bowie's father or her mother would come and award the scholarship on that night.
Over 20 years after the tragedy, Roberta and all the victims will never be forgotten, and the community of Strathfield has endeavoured to work hard to move forward and rebuild.
We just carried on with our life as we were before and said, well, this is what we have to do. We have to do it.
I think it's important for us to remember that something has happened in the community, but we've actually got over that hurdle and we've rebuilt ourselves.
I think we're both fairly optimistic people, and I often say that I'm more concerned about tomorrow rather than what happened yesterday. We can't do anything about that. Let's move on.
Personally, for myself, I've always found that talking about the Strathfield Massacre in 1991 is a way of me being able to come to terms with being involved in the massacre and being able to convince other people also to have a better society for all of us.
A hot summer day in Melbourne, and commuters on the Westgate Bridge are left stunned by a senseless act of violence.
It was just too shocking So the first instinct was not to believe it.
At the centre of this appalling crime was one man, a father, and shockingly, the victim was his own daughter.
When he asked Freeman what he'd done, he didn't answer, just got back into his car and drove off.
You just don't know how anyone can murder anyone, but to do it to your own flesh and blood, it just begs belief.
Paramedics worked for an hour at the scene, trying to revive 4-year-old Darcy Freeman.
That her father was involved, it automatically appalls you, and it's just beyond belief, really.
And I've been a policeman for 34 years, and that's as upset as I've been in terms of investigations that I've overseen.
Faced with silence from the father, questions needed to be asked. Just how could somebody commit such an atrocity?
They'd gone to 5 different psychologists to find out why this man had acted this way. You know, was he mad or bad?
The chilling story of the tragic death of Darcy Freeman was a crime that shook Australia. On a hot January morning in 2009, a man drove his car to Melbourne's Commonwealth Law Courts. He carefully reverse parked, fed the meter, and then led his 2 young sons inside.
He arrives at court, picks up his son and says, "Take my child." And they have no idea what's going on.
Almost catatonic was the way that I would describe him. He wasn't at all responsive, clearly upset.
And he's standing looking out, and his boys are at his feet, and he's shaking, and he looks like he's sobbing, but you can't see his face. And all his staff are milling around him. And I cannot get that image out of my head.
The man's name is Arthur Freeman, a 37-year-old tech worker from Melbourne. Hours before the confusing scenes at the law courts, Arthur was preparing to drive his sons to school on their first day back from the summer holidays. Also in the car, excited about her very first day at school, was his 4-year-old daughter, Darcy.
It was Darcy's first day at school.
That excitement, especially in the middle of summer, a hot morning, and they were coming from a family holiday, so Darcy's dad was to drop her off for school that day, so there would have been that air of excitement.
Darcy Freeman was 4 years old, described by family members as a determined and strong-willed young girl. She was especially close to her 2 brothers. In 2009, Darcy's family was in a state of turmoil, with her parents Arthur and Peter divorced and locked in a bitter custody battle.
The day before, Freeman had his access to his children reduced by a court.
It appears that Darcy's father was quite angry about that outcome in terms of his access to his children and in terms of financial settlement.
So he'd left the house and his dad had been, "You're really emotional, I'll drive with you." And he'd said no. He now has to live with not getting in that car for the rest of his life.
With his 3 children in the back of the car, Arthur Freeman made the 130-kilometre journey from his parents' holiday home in Aireys Inlet to Melbourne. The plan was to meet his ex-wife, Darcy's mum, at the school gates, so she could hand over a school uniform ready for her first day.
He'd driven from his parents' place down near Geelong. He'd stopped the car at the top of the Westgate Bridge.
A main commuter link from the southwest of Melbourne, the Westgate Bridge is an iconic sight across the city.
It's got a real history, the Westgate Bridge. It collapsed back when it was being constructed. It's certainly an icon in Melbourne and takes a whole lot of traffic out to the west and from the west into the city every morning. So really high volume, and in the peak hour in the morning, most of that volume is coming from the west and travelling towards the city.
Well, any approach into Melbourne on an aeroplane, you can see the Westgate Bridge. It always seems to stand out. Covers the, sort of comes across the river where the river meets the bay, so it's a very long area, and it's, you know, it's visible from just about everywhere in Melbourne.
I don't like driving on that bridge. I've never really liked it. It's, you know, it's not a pleasant place to be. It's, you know, it's high up and it's windy, and you only go over that bridge when you have to.
Just after 9 a.m. on the 29th of January 2009, as his children played games in the back of the car, Arthur Freeman had made a series of frantic phone calls on the 90-minute journey to Melbourne. As the temperature increased outside, so too did Arthur's stress levels. At the midpoint of the bridge, he made a decision that would have a devastating impact on the lives of so many people.
He'd asked Darcy to climb into the front seat. He then carried her to the rail and threw her over the bridge.
The height of the bridge is 58 metres. This inexplicable act, carried out just after 9 a.m. during the morning rush hour, was done in full view of commuters.
So the witnesses were saying, I thought it was a doll, or I don't know what I've just seen. I can't imagine how affected you would be.
Hello, I've just witnessed a man throw a child over the Westgate Bridge.
Thrown a child, did you say?
Yes, blonde hair and a ponytail.
Some of them said that they couldn't believe what they were seeing, that they thought it must have been a teddy bear. They just couldn't reconcile it.
The idea that you can get up and go through the motions, eat your breakfast, get in your car and drive to work, and as you're driving to work in, you know, peak hour traffic, you watch someone pull over, put their hazard lights on and throw their daughter over a bridge.
You can't get much more public than driving across Westgate Bridge in peak hour traffic on a weekday in Melbourne. That's about as public as it gets, and to stop your car in full view of other drivers and do what he did. I guess just, you know, the normality of it, just driving along and to see someone stop on the bridge would have, you know, you can only imagine what they would have sort of, you know, witnessed.
Moments before Arthur threw Darcy from the bridge, a truck had passed with a dash-mounted camera.
There was a four-wheel drive, or a truck that drove over the bridge with a video camera that ran on a continuous loop. And we've got his car with its hazard lights on the side of the bridge pulled over, so immediately before throwing Darcy off the bridge. And I remember being really glad that he didn't actually capture that moment, because it's not something that I really wanted my investigators to have to watch.
As the commuters were left stunned by the events unfolding before them, Arthur Freeman quietly headed back to his car.
Freeman threw Darcy off the bridge and then calmly got back in the car.
He drove down and stopped at the bottom of the bridge. Her brother kept saying, "You've got to go back, you've got to go back, Darcy can't swim." Not knowing that she'd fallen nearly 60 metres over the side of the bridge.
Darcy can't swim, Dad. From the eyes of an innocent child, he wouldn't have understood how devastating that fall was going to be. And in his head, he knew there was water there, so yeah, Darcy can't swim.
With the police alerted and the country not yet aware of the tragedy, Arthur Freeman continued to drive his two sons away from the scene, unaware his daughter Darcy, having survived the fall, fought for her life below. When police, ambulance and the media first received calls to respond, they all thought there must have been a mistake. A man had thrown his young daughter from Melbourne's Westgate Bridge 58 metres into the water below.
I think the general reaction in the newsroom was disbelief. It was a case of going, what? that doesn't sound right. And the police were saying, look, we don't know, we can't confirm it, but that's what we're hearing.
I remember getting the call that someone had been thrown from the Westgate Bridge. And I remember thinking there must be a mistake, this just can't be right.
We thought it was going to be wrong. We thought that within half an hour it would clarify itself. Maybe it was a doll, maybe it was something else.
And I thought that all the way, even driving to there, I thought there's got to be a better explanation for this, but unfortunately there wasn't. That's exactly what had happened. As distressing as they are, the facts are fairly straightforward, that he's got out of the car, taken this young girl and dropped her over the side of the bridge.
I think people do react differently when it comes to children because of the helplessness of the children, the dependency that the children have on adults. And to have that violated is horrific.
When police and ambulance crews arrived at the scene, the tragedy was confirmed and everybody worked tirelessly to save the little girl, who had been in the water for 15 minutes and incredibly was still alive.
Darcy had been recovered from the water. I think it was the water police had a boat and fished her out of the water. So by then I knew what had happened. It was fairly chaotic. There was a lot of police there, both uniform and detectives, and a whole lot of media there, everyone trying to work out and make some sense as to what had occurred.
Everybody was affected by it because it was so public. He'd also involved everybody else in it. He'd involved those people driving to work. He'd involved the paramedics that had to resuscitate her at the bottom.
The emergency service workers and who did everything, and the doctors who did everything they could to try to save her. Yeah, it's remarkable. That really struck me.
That was a really tough job for the police and the ambulance that had got there immediately. But at the time you're so busy that's not the critical time. I think people cope better when they've got tasks to do. And there was a whole lot to do in terms of Darcy and her care.
As rescue crews frantically tried to keep young Darcy alive, Arthur Freeman drove to the Commonwealth Law Courts, handed over his 2 sons, and waited for the world to grasp the enormity of his actions.
When he drove off, he drove then through busy peak hour traffic to reverse parked and put money in the meter at a parking bay. He then walked into the federal court with his 2 sons and says, "Take my child."
Police arrived at the Commonwealth Law Courts at 10:30 a.m, 90 minutes after Arthur Freeman threw his daughter Darcy from the Westgate Bridge.
And his boys are at his feet, and he's shaking, and he looks like he's sobbing, but you can't see his face.
Unable to comprehend the enormity of the situation, Arthur's eldest son told the court guards his parents' names. When police arrived, the 2 young boys were cared for by court counsellors.
Arthur was conveyed back to the homicide squad office. A tape was turned on. He almost catatonic was the way that I would describe him. He wasn't at all responsive, clearly upset. So we had to get a forensic medical officer in to examine him, a doctor who made a determination that he was unfit for interview.
In a strange way, it kind of came to a conclusion very quickly.
It wasn't long after that Freeman was arrested. And I do remember the Premier did a press conference that day, I guess just in a bid to in an attempt to put some words to what had happened, to try to capture some of the grief and shock that people were feeling.
I just shuddered when I heard about it. I think every Victorian, you just shudder. You just think, how can that happen?
I don't think Melbourne or even Australia had seen or heard about something like this on this scale.
With Arthur Freeman now in custody, ambulance crews had worked on Darcy for over an hour before her tiny body was transported to hospital for intensive care.
She had some brain injuries, some severe internal injuries and some bruising. The police that attended commenced CPR, as did the ambulance when they arrived, and that continued until she got to hospital.
As news spread of the shocking event, police had the daunting task of informing Darcy's mother, who had been waiting outside the school.
There were two members of the homicide squad that went out to pick up Darcy's mum and take her to the hospital. Darcy had been taken to hospital, so we had some homicide squad members with her and some uniformed members with her, and that's just a really tough day at work.
Darcy Freeman was flown directly to the Royal Children's Hospital, where emergency staff continued their efforts to keep the little girl alive. When Peter Barnes arrived to see her daughter, sadly, she was forced to make a heartbreaking decision.
She'd had to stand there in the hospital and tell the staff to turn off her daughter's life support, and that she did cradle her daughter as she died.
Despite the efforts of ambulance and hospital staff, at 1:35 p.m, nearly 4.5 hours after being thrown from the Westgate Bridge by her father, 4-year-old Darcy Iris Freeman died.
Darcy Freeman was 4. She hadn't lived at all.
It's really, any time there's young children involved, it's really difficult. And young Darcy, she was a young 4-year-old girl, really attractive. We've all got a maternal and paternal instinct, and she's died in a terrible way in tragic circumstances through no fault of her own. So in some ways you shouldn't say that some murders or deaths are worse than others, but clearly these circumstances, they're really difficult to get your head around. And I've been a policeman for 34 years, and that's as upset as I've been in terms of investigations that I've overseen.
The repercussions of Arthur Freeman's actions were felt across the entire city of Melbourne. People were in shock, trying to understand how someone could deliberately harm a child in such a shocking and public way.
How can a man throw his daughter 58 metres to her death? What's the explanation there? And a lot of people were saying, well, he's got to be crazy, hasn't he?
As Arthur Freeman sat behind bars, legal teams and health professionals endeavoured to build a case to comprehend his actions. It was 2 years after the tragic death of Darcy Freeman that her father, Arthur, stood trial. He had entered a plea of not guilty. Legal teams took time to consider Arthur's psychological health, personal history, the family law court decision, family and witness statements, and every mitigating detail related to the case.
The general reaction to covering that trial was people would say, so what are you covering? Can you tell them? And they'd say, oh, I can't listen to that. I turn that off. It was people, especially people with young children, were saying, I turn that off when it comes on telly. I turn it off when you're on the radio. I don't listen to that. It's too upsetting.
Darcy's name comes up and you can see the shake of their head. People don't want to talk about it.
There was just something special about poor little Darcy, you know, and what happened to her and the way it was done. It's just... it shocked everyone.
As the media converged on the first day of the court case, everyone was keen to see Darcy's mother, Peter Barnes.
We'd never seen Peter Barnes. We'd never seen Darcy's mum. And she lived in WA, so she'd travelled over to do this case. We were aware that that was going to be extremely confronting and that this woman was going through a lot at the time.
There was a respect in the way the media reported the case, and it's a really difficult situation that they find themselves in because there's a need for the news to get out. It's got a whole lot of public interest, not despite the fact that it's so tragic. So they've got a responsibility to report on what had occurred, but they've obviously got kids and they obviously can't be unaffected by what happened. They handled themselves really well.
It was organised with a detective to ask the family if they would consider essentially reenacting a walk for us. So we agreed with Darcy's mum, Peter Barnes, that if we filmed her once, that was the shot we were going to use for the whole trial. It's extremely unheard of, but we decided that she should be given space
As the trial began, all eyes were on the man who had callously thrown his daughter from the bridge.
Arthur Freeman arrived at court looking like this dishevelled, crazy guy. He had crazy hair. He was later described as a Rasputin-like mad monk kind of image that he portrayed. He was dishevelled and he just sat. I remember he sat in the dock, just staring gormlessly.
I don't know what explanation Mr. Freeman could provide that would make any sense to me or to anybody else.
A lot of people were saying, well, he's got to be crazy, hasn't he? Because in a lot of people's minds, that was the only explanation you could have. That man's mad.
It's very difficult, I think, very difficult for me and very difficult for a lot of people to understand why the offender would overcome all his own values and kill a child.
So on the very first day it was set out, the arguments, the prosecution stood up and spoke to the jury and said, this man wasn't mad. This man killed his own daughter as an ultimate act of revenge against his ex-wife because they were going through a bitter custody battle. And so from then on, that was the argument. Was he bad or mad?
Arthur Freeman's ex-wife Peter Barnes sat in court throughout the entire proceedings, supported by her family.
I don't know how a mother can sit through that and listen to what occurred.
We were very conscious that not only was Darcy's mum there and her family. You go into court as a court reporter and you brace yourself, going, okay, you have to steel yourself against this. But that wasn't the case with Peter Barnes. She took to the stand and she was stoic, she was polite, calm, firm. If he had done this to get back at her, to hurt her, which obviously he had to an extreme extent, she was not going to let him see that.
She had got to that stage where she wasn't going to let him hurt her, and she was quite dignified as the way she delivered her evidence and did a terrific job in giving her evidence under the circumstances.
As the trial continued, the defence put forward their case regarding Arthur Freeman's actions that day.
The argument put forward by the defence was that he was disassociating, they called it, acting like an automaton, like a robot, like acting without conscious thought behind it. And that he did that in that split second when he threw her over the bridge.
I'm not convinced that people offending in that manner are unaware of the wrongness of the behaviour.
Well, the prosecution made a point of telling the jury that they'd gone to 5 different psychologists to find out why this man had acted this way. And all of them had agreed that he knew what he was doing and that he knew right from wrong when he was doing it, and that his act would cause real and significant harm to his child, if not kill her.
During the trial, the jury heard details about the phone calls Arthur Freeman made in the lead-up to Darcy's death. Arthur had spoken with his sister, making no reference to any pending tragedy, instead worrying about his children's school lunches and being late for Darcy's first day. Another call to a close friend in the UK relayed his fears about losing his kids, feeling helpless and being surrounded by angry women in the courts who were not supportive of fathers. He spoke to her of pursuing greater custody through the courts and offered no warning of the horror ahead. The call ended when her phone battery went dead. At 8:54 a.m, Arthur received a phone call from his ex-wife, Peter Barnes. She was concerned Arthur was running late to drop Darcy off.
That's been the catalyst, and for some reason that catalyst has been more powerful than their own awareness of the life of their kid, and that's very difficult to understand.
As Arthur Freeman approached the Westgate Bridge, the terrifying words he uttered over the phone to his ex-wife were a forewarning of his appalling actions.
The words he said to his ex-wife over the phone moments before, "Say goodbye to your children," that are just chilling. And they probably illustrate his intentions at the time and probably his motives in terms of spousal revenge.
I kill the wife, it's not going to make much difference. I kill the child, my own child, it's going to affect the mother for the rest of her life. You know, it's something she's never going to get over and never will in any way, shape or form.
When the defence's psychologist was saying, well, no, he was disassociating, the question put to him was, well, why did he do all those other rational things? He acted certainly like anybody else would act when they were driving in peak hour traffic. He's on a bridge in peak hour traffic, but he remembers to put his hazard lights on when he pulls to the side. If somebody is disassociating and not acting consciously, why would they do that? That's a very rational thing to do.
As witnesses testified and evidence was put forward, Arthur Freeman sat silently in the dock, showing very little emotion.
The pathologist came and detailed in very specific detail about the injuries that Darcy Freeman had sustained in that fall, and that was the only time that Arthur Freeman in the dock showed any emotion whatsoever. And he started to wipe tears away from his eyes.
A lot of people actually do feel remorse once they're locked up. So we go see them in these cells after they've been charged or during the trial. And some are actually remorseful. Few, not everyone, but some are actually remorseful and contrite. And if they are, it makes the job easier to be able to tell the judge something about them. If they're not and they come up with all sorts of weird and wonderful issues of mitigation, then I hope we lose them.
I think most of us went to court wanting to understand how a man could throw his 4-year-old child 58 metres to her death. And most people that you spoke to would say, well, he's mad, isn't he? He has to be mad. That was the explanation everybody had for it, because that's the only explanation, plausible explanation people had. You couldn't do that unless you had lost your mind.
It's not normal behaviour, it is abnormal behaviour. It's not right, and it doesn't fit logically that in response to little Blue you had with the mother of the children, you go and kill the children. That's illogical and irrational.
After 19 days, the trial drew to a close, and jurors retired to deliberate on the case against Arthur Freeman.
The jury was deliberating for days and days and days, and we're all waiting, and it had been about 5 days, and they kept coming back and asking questions of the judge, and it was very clear they were very confused about what they had to decide. So after about 19 days of evidence, the jury was asked to go and deliberate and decide whether Arthur Freeman deliberately killed his child or was mad. The thing that was confusing them was that they didn't seem to get, if he's not mad, then he did murder his child. They thought there was other things in between.
Despite denying any memory of what he had done, Arthur Freeman accepted that he had caused Darcy's death. The jury had to decide if Arthur's actions were those of fluctuating madness or filicide.
They were to decide whether this man was mentally impaired or whether he committed murder. But it seemed that they thought they were two separate things. So if he wasn't mentally impaired, then they had to look at whether he'd committed murder. But it was actually very black and white. So they kept coming in and asking the judge, and the judge kept repeating it in a lot of legalese, which is their job, that's how they do it. And then they came in and told the courtroom that they were deadlocked and they couldn't make a decision. And there was women in that jury that were beside themselves. They were crying and looked very frustrated. And there was a lot of tension in that jury. You could see it. because some people got it, others didn't, and it just wasn't working. And I just kept thinking to myself, what if they come back and find him not guilty?
Arthur Freeman never apologised for his actions or never explained why he did what he did. Often reluctant to appear in court, his trial was an examination of humanity. The jury had spent 5 days trying to understand why Darcy had died and was still no closer to a verdict. In 2011, Arthur Freeman stood in court charged with the murder of his 4-year-old daughter, Darcy. Over 19 days, the court heard evidence relating to Freeman's psychological state, and the jury was deadlocked in their decision of whether Freeman was mad or bad.
It's like a sense of dread, because you honestly don't know what's going to happen next.
He was just a mongrel and a scumbag, and that's why he was there, and there's no other reason.
The 37-year-old's barrister has argued that he was mentally impaired at the time.
It was about 7 o'clock, and usually jurors go home at 4:30. And the judge had said to them, no, I think you can reach this decision. I would like you to stay back. And he said it out very clearly, and in a way dropped the legal jargon and just went, if not this, then this. And they went back, and 40 minutes later they came back with a verdict.
After 19 days of challenging evidence and 5 days of tense and emotional deliberations, the jury returned with a unanimous verdict of guilty. Arthur Freeman was responsible for the murder of his daughter, Darcy.
I got in a cab and I burst into tears. Just a sense of relief. It was answered. The family had got their answer now. He was going to be punished for what he'd done. And I just cried, just couldn't stop crying.
As the family welcomed the verdict, Darcy's mother, Peter Barnes, read her victim impact statement in court and spoke of the heartbreak of losing her daughter.
I think she only started to show how upset she was when she read her victim impact statement, but that was after he was found guilty.
Where to start is a challenge, as this statement brings to the surface all of the raw emotions I live with daily. The saying, time heals all wounds, is not true for myself, and I don't ever expect it to be. Not a day goes by where I do not constantly think of Darcy, where I don't miss her and wish with all my heart that she was with me.
You're never going to get over it, but if you don't do something about it and move on, and that's why these things of expressing yourself in the victim impact statements are all good therapy, and it's good therapy for the people to get it off their chest.
No one can erase the thoughts and associated feelings I have of sitting in the hospital and having to tell the hospital staff that they were allowed to turn the life support machine off, of holding Darcy in my arms as she passed away and knowing that this decision would take her from me again, and knowing that there was no other option available to me.
The sentence was aired live on radio so the community could share in the moment.
The 2 local radio stations here decided to stream the audio of the sentence live. So people were driving around Melbourne listening to the sentence of Arthur Freeman. And I think the decision by the radio stations to do that was to give closure. And I think that was the right thing to do because people needed closure.
The jury rejected your defence of mental impairment, and once that defence was rejected, it was inevitable that you be convicted of murder. This was the killing of an innocent child. The circumstances of the killing were horrible. The throwing of your 4-year-old daughter from a bridge more than 80 metres above the ground could not be more horrible. It follows that you brought the broader community into this case in a way that's rarely, if ever, been seen before. It offends our collective conscience.
The big question in this case was, should he get a parole period? which would mean that you get a life sentence, but then you would get the opportunity to apply to be released from prison after a certain period of time. It was given that he was going to get a life sentence for the murder of his daughter.
You'll be sentenced to be in prison for life. I fix a period of 32 years before you will be eligible for parole. It means that the earliest date you will qualify to be released will be the 29th of January 2041, when you will be 67 years of age.
That's a big whack of a sentence. We have double murderers in prison with lesser sentences than that.
Well, that particular judge was very good at the sentencing, and so it obviously affected them as well as everyone else in the community, and I believe that what he said was great that he said it, and I just wish more judges would sort of do what that particular judge did.
He pointedly said a lot of people blame themselves, and then he very pointedly said, but you did this, you have to take responsibility for this. Because I can imagine all those people driving across the bridge that saw it. You know, do they replay it in their head? If I'd have rushed him, if I'd have got out sooner, if there would have been people that have passed that didn't stop at all.
Just goes to show how many victims there are in this case. Her death would have affected so many people, from her mother, her brothers, to Freeman's family, to Peter Barnes's extended family, to the people who witnessed what they did, to the emergency services people.
I'm told that some of those guys are still struggling today, because what I think you do is you try to make sense of something that just doesn't make any sense, and it's really hard to reconcile those two things.
With criminal proceedings completed, Arthur Freeman sought leave to appeal his sentence, a request that was unsuccessful. Questions raised in the court case by Darcy's mother, Peter Barnes, with regards to her doctors, were then addressed in a coronial inquest to explore if any lessons could be learned that might prevent similar deaths in the future.
Criminal proceedings were wound up in 2011, and it wasn't until all these years later that the State Coroner, the Victorian State Coroner, decided to hold an inquest into her death to examine the roles of health professionals in the lead up. The focus was on Peter Barnes's meetings with her GPs in 2007 and 2008, and the concerns that she allayed to those doctors, whether those doctors acted responsibly in not reporting her concerns to authorities.
The inquest heard details that police had attended a domestic dispute between Arthur Freeman and Peter Barnes in 2007. After 7 years of marriage, Peter had expressed concerns for her children's welfare to her doctor at the time, after the police intervention.
She had reported, I think, an incident where Freeman came over to her house one day and there was a wrangle over trying to get Darcy's younger brother. So police were certainly aware that, of instances of concern, and that was actually one of the reasons why the doctors didn't report or didn't disclose that information they were presented with to authorities, because they knew that the incidents had already been reported to the police. So they were comfortable, according to their statements, they were comfortable with not reporting it to authorities.
Satisfied that police had dealt with the details of the 2007 domestic dispute, doctors stated there were no emotional or physical indicators evident to them that Arthur Freeman was a threat to his children at the time.
One doctor said in a statement that even in hindsight, he just had no idea that Freeman would snap the way he did.
If they indicate to me, yeah, I had woke up this morning and decided this is what I'm going to do, and some do, it is a different issue, psychologically, I think. And it, in my opinion, intensifies the disturbance of the perpetrator if there is premeditation.
Those doctors never alerted authorities. The reason they didn't was because no one was able to really read Freeman's mood at the time. The Arthur Freeman they saw was always a man of a calm exterior, he was polite.
Family violence is a significant issue, and this is the really extreme end of it. So we'd love to be able to stop it, but it's one of those things that you can look back in hindsight and perhaps point to indicators. He was clearly upset, but the family law court stuff had been going on for some time. There was nothing to indicate that he was going to do what he's going to do.
In 2012, Peter Barnes took legal action against Vic Rhodes after they repeatedly ignored advice to install safety barriers prior to Darcy's death, a case that was settled out of court. The coronial inquest into Darcy's death recognised the installation of barriers on the West Cape Bridge 2 months after Darcy's death had a significant effect on the prevention of jumping suicides from the bridge.
There had been some other instances of people committing suicide on the West Cape Bridge. Since that time there have been some barriers that have been erected so people can no longer climb over or be thrown over the bridge.
The inquest findings place responsibility for Darcy's death solely with Arthur Freeman. His actions and Darcy's death were unable to have been predicted with any great certainty, and recommendations for the introduction of compulsory family violence training for doctors were made.
There's a new push now for doctors to have increased training and to have mandatory reporting. Probably safe to say there's been a renewed focus on family violence issues in Australia in recent years. The inquest into Darcy's death came amid this renewed focus.
Darcy Freeman's name has become synonymous with shock and sadness, a case now etched into the psyche of Melbourne. A timely reminder of the fragility of life, a tiny face of innocence that continues to evoke difficult memories for all involved.
It was certainly a terrible tragedy. I'd certainly go so far as to say it's something that I'll never forget, nor will any of the people that attended there on the day, and it will never ever make any sense to me.
People still talk about the Arthur Freeman case, people still talk about Darcy being thrown from the bridge. You hear people in Melbourne talk about how they drive across the West Gate, and even though we have massive security guards there now, which came about after this crime, people still picture it in their heads.
It's one of those cases that still strikes a chord with people. You like to think your neighbours are people you can trust and that, your kids are safe at school and that, the driver in front of you won't pull over on a bridge and do something like that.
He's incarcerated for over 30 years. There are obviously some demons there, but he's got a lot of time to reflect and think about what he did.